So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Liz Truss admits a no US trade deal in the short to medium term. I don't know how long short to medium term, what that means. Short term, you're talking potentially within a decade, in my opinion. Probably say 5 years. Say 5 years, right? Medium term, I'd say it's 15 years. So how long are we talking here? Truss has said a new trade deal with the United States is unlikely in the short to medium term. They said that a trade deal before 2030 is unlikely. That's when Boris Johnson was in charge, and that's when we had Liz Truss as trade secretary. So, for them to say that it's still not going to happen is kind of crazy. We must be talking well over 10 years. The US can set up a series of bilateral deals with the UK, similar to what we have with the EU, but, they're the bigger player here. America, the bigger player in relation to the UK. And that's a big problem when you're talking trade, because one side has more power than the other. You have leverage. The UK government has previously promised a post-Brexit trade deal by 2022. So clock's ticking, guys. We've only got, we've got October, November, December. We've got about 3 months left in the year. Clock's ticking. Tick, 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 tick. Must have been Johnson that promised that. It was never going to happen. These sorts of deals, done properly, take minimum 5 years. Of course, you just have to cave to what the other side wants if you want them quickly, like the Australia deal or the New Zealand deal. The US has so many different sectors that have a lot of political power that all want something out of a UK-US deal that takes time. You've got big pharma, you've got agriculture, you've got manufacturing. You have so many different kind of industries within those services. Silicon Valley might want a piece. They might want to take sectors out of the NHS, for example. There's so many different kind of movers and shakers at play. It's a weird phrase, I know, but that it will take time. Labour said the lack of a trade deal with the US is costing billions in potential lost trade opportunities and holding back growth. I mean, from what I remember, us having a trade deal with the US would not add that much to our GDP, and that's something we'll talk about in a few minutes. Speaking ahead of a flight with the US, Truss said there aren't currently any negotiations taking place with the US. We don't have expectation that those are going to start in the short to medium term. Me playing the tiny violin. In May, the UK signed a memorandum of understanding with the US, state of Indiana. These are junk. They're worth nothing. They're not legally binding. Congress makes trade deals, not individual states. The US is Britain's biggest individual trading partner, accounts for one in every £6 of UK trade. That's true, but out of the top 10 countries the UK exports to, most of the UK exports go to EU/EEA countries. So the bulk of our trade will be going to specific countries that are closer to us that we no longer are trading with as easily as before. A deal to make it easier for the two nations to trade with each other has been a much coveted jewel for the government's post-Brexit crown, yet that's one we have not gotten. It's mostly optics. The UK would struggle to export to the US due to the fact that a lot of the SMEs are still not used to the paperwork needed to export to the US. That's another custom systems to learn, another, more different kinds of paperwork. It might be easier than exporting in the EU in respect to, I doubt individual states have their own kind of customs procedures. I reckon it's just one standardised system. Also, the cost of transporting goods is going to go up, as there are a few key reasons why a trade deal would not help SMEs who are continuing to lose trade on their doorstep. A lot of these companies wouldn't have much experience exporting to the US. It'd be very difficult for them to build a customer base over there. Not saying it's impossible. It's difficult. But those hopes were dashed in the early months of Biden's administration. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Trade Secretaries, first Truss and Trevelyan, conceded that the US had other priorities. Could you imagine? We're with the UK, we're newly single, we're saying, look, man, we can give you and these other people all these deals that you can't refuse, and everyone's like, yeah, we don't care. Imagine you being that person. President Biden made clear protecting US jobs came first, which is a huge pivot from the kind of like the NAFTA and TTIP kind of trade agreements that they were trying to sign under Obama, and the stuff under Bush and also Bill Clinton. We've seen a slight tilt around the narrative of protecting jobs in America, first from Trump, who didn't implement it. He made all sorts of promises around Foxconn that never happened. Biden is claiming he'll do more, yet that's yet to be seen. It might be them chasing optics, but the more American people want protectionism, the more politicians will have to pretend to care, or it's another way to get concessions out of the UK for a more tilted trade deal. Those are the two possibilities around it, but it looks like Joe Biden is determined to push the narrative of America first. We'll see, if that plays out in years to come. Instead, US-UK meetings focus on cooperation issues around China and Ukraine. These are issues the US cares more about than us, especially on China, so you can see who's leading the conversation here. It's obviously not us. Why did Truss choose to raise this explicitly today? Perhaps to get in first to imply that it's the UK's choice. Well, I mean, everyone knows it's not the UK's choice. We've been begging for a trade deal for a good few years now. Brexiteers talked about how it's a big prize for Brexit. Look how that's gone now. But also to signal that it's a threat from the US to refrain from talks unless the UK back down on an option to dissolve the protocol would be empty. Because the US, that's been an issue for a while. The US kept dangling a free trade deal in front of us, saying, you keep playing stupid games with the Northern Ireland Protocol, and you might not get a trade deal. But if I were the US, I'd just tell the UK any breach of the Good Friday Agreement has major consequences. That's the narrative I would be taking right now. Labour Shadow International Trade Secretary Nick Timothy Simmons said the admissions that there is no prospect of a trade deal with the USA is terrible news for the UK economy. It's not. It's really not. Is it though? The US getting a trade deal would be way worse. It would not be on our terms or even equal terms. The Australia and New Zealand deals are terrible for loads of reasons. Those deals would damage jobs in the UK and increase global emissions. I get the angle Labour are trying to go for. It's low-hanging fruit. Labour would not be able to get a deal out of the US either, most likely. This is an embarrassment for Liz Truss. I mean, that is true, especially since she was the former trade secretary. You think she would have built up some rapport or something with her counterparts in the US. There's a couple of other things I wanted to talk about here. You got Lord Moylan saying, I can't remember Vote Leave promising a US trade deal, and I as a Brexiteer have always been very skeptical of how desirable it would be. So we're going to cut to Michael Gove here.
I think that being outside the customs union means that we can negotiate our own trade deals with other countries, not just economic superpowers like the United States, but also emerging markets and developing nations as well.
We're struggling to get trade deals with the United States and also emerging markets, so that's not going very good.
Look, this is laughable. America's got a free trade deal with Oman. America's got a free trade deal with Australia. Are you seriously telling me that their oldest and closest global ally, with whom they do enormous...
Would we really be America's oldest ally, considering they had the War of Independence against us? It can't be us, can it?
Amounts of business, and with whom big commercial companies would say, don't talk such nonsense.
Cheer up. A few years from now, we are going to live in a global, free, democratic and global Britain.
We already lived in that society. Free, democratic, supposedly.
Have trade agreements in place with the biggest economies in the world, like the US and China.
Whoops. That's not going to happen.
Sorts of opportunities we have to open up trade with the US. But
I think we might have actually lost a lot of access the EU had with their bilateral deals as well. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but we might have less access to the US now than we did when we were EU members.
That also goes for countries around the world. But, well, you're right, the single biggest deal that we need to do is a free trade agreement with our friends and partners over the Channel.
Well, that's not happening.
In my experience, the Americans are very tough negotiators indeed, and we will do a great deal with them. And it will open up our opportunities for UK businesses and particularly services companies in the US.
So services aren't typically covered in free trade agreements, not en masse anyways. Free trade agreements typically do goods, not services.
But yes, it will be a tough old haggle. But
it's not going to be a tough old haggle because no haggling will happen. There's another clip I want to talk about here, which
trade deals with America.
You told everyone in 2016 a US free trade deal was there for the taking, quickly in the back pocket, it would happen.
That wasn't me.
We're going to do a fantastic deal.
It was the previous President of the United States who said that we would do a trade deal rapidly. I said nothing on that.
We hear that we're first in line to do a great free trade deal with the United States.
I've always thought that a trade deal with the US would be difficult.
You see, once they're in charge, I always said it would be really hard to achieve this thing I said a few years ago would be very easy. The pivot is just so embarrassing. But the US trade deal is dead, and the final thing I want to talk about is the GDP in the US is expected to increase by 0.03% or 0.05% in scenario 1 and 2. So that would be from a UK-US deal. For the UK, it would increase by about 0.07%, so it's equivalent to 1.6 billion or 3.4 billion to us, depending on which scenario you want to go for and the percentages you want to use. For them, it'd be 3.9 and 7.5. So their kind of increase in GDP would be higher in terms of when you talk about raw numbers, because their economy is obviously, much bigger than ours. But if you talk about the percentage increase, our percentage increase would actually be higher than what the Americans would get, and they would no doubt use that in a trade deal. And you can talk about how a trade deal with the Americans would benefit us in terms of the pound being low, so imports, sort of our exports to America would be cheaper. But American trade negotiators would know that. That's the problem. American trade negotiators would know that, and the more stuff we import from, the more stuff they import from us, is they could easily try and phrase that as, that's American jobs being lost to the British, and they could try and force more concessions out of us because of our lower currency. America has complained for a long time now that China is devaluing its currency. It doesn't, it'd be hard to argue the UK is actively devaluing our currency, but given the rate what the politicians are saying, and the fact that when Kwasi Kwarteng was giving his speech, the mini budget, the pound was dropping based on what he was saying, maybe the Americans will try and make a similar argument that the UK is actively devaluing its currency by being absolute morons. But the simple fact is, RIP the UK-US trade deal. It's dead. It's not going to happen. There's a lot of politicians. Americans are very clear. You've got, I think his name is Richard Neal, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. He said, no, you keep messing around the Northern Ireland Protocol, you're definitely not getting a deal from us. And we are still messing around with the Northern Ireland Protocol, so it's not going to happen. It wouldn't take a genius to figure out that it wasn't going to happen, especially when Joe Biden's first statement to the BBC was, I'm Irish. Don't forget it, It's just funny that, some people seem to be surprised about this. Now you've got, Brexiteers kind of walking their statements back saying, I don't remember Vote Leave promising a US deal. Well, this is Vote Leave.
Like free trade deals with America.
Well, there you go, mate. Everyone else, the internet remembers. The internet doesn't forget. The internet's undefeated. I'm kind of rambling here, but point being is that they told us we can get a deal with America. Where's it at, though? It's dead. It's finished. It's gone. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.